follow me. That's Jesus' call to all of us. And all he asks is that we follow him. No other qualification is needed. It's very simple, not at all easy. I'm going to tell you the story of one ordinary man who heard that call and followed, and you can read about it in the Bible, in the Gospels. Here is Simon's story, part 1. My name's Simon. Well, I've got a new name now, but we'll come to that. I don't think I've grown into it yet. I was a fisherman in Galilee until I met Jesus. Out of the blue, this man came past and said, "Follow me." I didn't know much about him, but there was something about him that I just couldn't resist. And when this carpenter turned teacher gave me a fishing lesson, well, that had an impact. We'd had a fruitless night's fishing. And then, just as we were tidying up and getting ready to go home for something to eat and some sleep, he invited himself onto my boat, used it as a pulpit to speak to the crowds, and then he started telling us fishermen how to fish. Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. What did he know? But because it was him, not the carpenter, not the teacher, but him, we did what he said and caught so many fish that the nets started to break, and James and John had to come out in their boat to help us. Something strange, something scary and beyond our grasp, something godly was going on here. I felt he couldn't just see the fish out in the deep water. He could see into the depths of me. And I saw something of myself as I really was, my sinful self in the presence of holiness. I was on my knees. Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. I couldn't live with this man. But at the same time, I couldn't live without him. But Jesus called me away from fishing, or into a much bigger kind of fishing. You'll be fishing for people, he said. And before I could even think about it, I was off, and I wasn't the only one. My brother Andrew and our fishing friends James and John were the first. But soon there were others from all walks of life, from nationalist zealots to that tax-collecting collaborator Matthew. Nobody liked Matthew. But gathered around Jesus, we soon became friends. A strange band of friends, but Jesus brought us together. And being with Jesus and following Jesus was bigger than anything that might have divided us. And if we were good enough for him, then we were good enough for each other. Jesus' choice of followers could be strange sometimes. His choice? Yes. It was he who chose us and not the other way around. He seemed to like the people that nobody else spoke to, but the better sort, well, Jesus didn't have much time for them. He called all sorts of people to follow him, but not everybody was so keen. They didn't all realize how great a thing this was, and it seemed the more they had, the harder it was for them to leave it behind. One time a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Surely a teacher of the law would be a good person to have on board. But Jesus put him off, saying, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Others just asked him for time to tidy up their affairs first. Sometimes I wondered if I should have done that instead of just dropping everything and walking off into the unknown. And what about Matthew? I always wondered what happened to his table full of tax money when Jesus said, "Follow me," and he just came. But Jesus just told them to follow. Follow now. Don't look back. It was the only way. Another time, a rich young man came to Jesus, very earnest. He had money, he had influence, he had his life ahead of him, but we could see he knew there was something missing. He was longing for a real connection with God. Another one you'd love to have in your number. He'd give our group respectability, not to mention some handy cash. But Jesus set the bar so high he just couldn't face it. This is how Matthew tells it. Just then, a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There's only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he had great wealth. In the end, we realized Jesus wasn't just talking about money and possessions. He was talking about priorities. He was challenging us too. What's the most important thing in your life? What do you depend on? It will get in the way of your following Jesus. Do you need to get rid of it? Even if people didn't follow, they were changed by meeting him. Not always for the better, if they wouldn't accept his terms. The rich man went away sad, and Jesus was sad to see him go. He always challenged people, but let them choose. The religious leaders we had grown up to respect and trust turned into murderers to get rid of him. But many people had their illnesses cured, their broken bones fixed, their demons driven out, and many of them did follow him, but he never demanded it. But for those who did follow him and didn't look back or walk away, Jesus made new men and women of us. Our lives were so transformed by being with him and hearing his words that even when things got really hard and many others walked away, and Jesus asked us, his closest followers, if we wanted to leave too, I said what we were all thinking: "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." And a new community was formed from these new people. Strangers and even enemies became friends. There were rough edges, we had our disagreements and jealousies, but this was something new. He taught us so much. He set the bar so high. He taught us that it isn't just about what you do. It's about your heart. A heart that is right with God. And for that, you need a heart that is right with other people. He made us aware of how far short we fell of God's standard. He didn't have to tell us. Just being with him was enough. We knew. I think that's why they turned against him. He shone a very uncomfortable light into our hearts, and they couldn't stand it. They just wanted to put the light out. But for those who could face it, he told us God forgives without limit, and that we have to forgive others without limit. He taught in parables. He talked about seeds and fruit, houses on rock and sand, lost sheep, lost people, things everybody could relate to. But he went so deep. He looked around at the people and saw lost sheep. They crowded around him all the time. We wanted a break. He needed a break. He would take us away to get that break and to teach us, but they kept coming, and they always found him. And then he taught them too, and then he fed them. He did it. Fed thousands, even though we didn't have even enough food for ourselves. He gave it to us. We gave it to them. We kept on giving, and there was always more. and plenty for ourselves at the end. This was God's provision. This was God's feast. This was Jesus.